time, on episode 3, Shopping on the Web, our adventurers got into a bit of a sticky situation where they had encountered some giant spiders. They dispatched these pretty easily with a little bit of their pyromantic tendencies. Pyro. But they were able to dispatch them pretty easily and returned to Peacekeeper Lamont, where they were rewarded with not just money, but a free meal at the Golden Cat. When they entered, Whiskey had noticed that there was a dragonborn in the corner, a little distressed it seemed. As the group talked to this bronze dragonborn with blue feathers on his horns, they realized that this man had helped them in the past on their first encounter, keeping them alive. When the group continued asking what made him so distressed, he informed them that his village had disappeared. More so, the other villagers. He's been searching for answers and had come across another group that had been ransacking an empty town of Fedlam. He had retrieved some papers, which he was now pulling out for the group to read. In episode 4, an unexpected foyer into Goblin territory, we see the group deciphering Brapri's letters that he had taken in the Golden Cat. Whiskey is informing the group what is on each of these 3 letters. Each of these letters are written in Infernal, and each are addressed to a certain person named Rai. The first letter reads, "I am sending you out to the northern towns of Trava. On the scroll that accompanied this letter, there are names of towns and villages I wish for you to test our new weapon. We must see how effective it is. I expect you to have results soon." The second letter reads, "After the trial at Peripherio, we deemed the weapon a great success, but as we continued in Chaim and Iona, we see that the weapon is not a complete success. There were survivors. Although something occurred to the survivors, it is not our desired outcome, and thus, after seeing how the weapon twisted the survivors' psyche, we have let them go in Trava to cause more trouble for the local law. Modifications were made to the weapon since. Continue with the trials and report back. We need to make sure it is a complete success without any variables before we continue with the plan." The third letter reads, "The success rate of the weapon is astounding. Complete the rest of the list before we continue to Aid for Phase 2 of our experiment. Phase 2 will start in 2 months during Miroslav, where we will get a larger test pool." The group decided the next best course of action would be to head to Fedlam the next morning. Once morning came, Whiskey was stopped by his father, Davis, asking for Whiskey's help to set up the booth for Miroslav. Whiskey had never told his father that he was an adventurer, and so informed his group that he would meet them in Fedlam as soon as he could once his obligations were done in town, and helped his father. The group then retrieved a horse that they rented and headed north along the byway. As the group made their way towards Fedlam along the byway, they passed through a small farming town called Mios. Instead of staying there for the night, they decided to push forward a few more hours and camped in a clearing. That night, they encountered a couple of dogs of some kind that disturbed their rest. Instead of fighting them off, the group decided to head more north away from them and camped for the rest of the night. The next morning, they were on the outskirts of Fedlam, where everything seemed eerily quiet. Not very much noise was being made by wildlife, and you could just hear a trickle of the stream nearby. As they were entering the town, Daria had noticed that there were tracks and hoof prints and carts along the way coming from the town rather recently in the past week, and then headed off-roading from the road and into the forest. Brapri was able to discern that off of these tracks it seemed to be the right amount of people that he had seen that night that he stole the papers. The group decided to trek forward cautiously into the town, unsure what this town would hold ahead of them. Pyru decided to enter many of the houses to try and discern what information she could. Inside many of the houses, it was the same thing over and over again. Dust had accumulated, and there was many uneaten food at the table and mold growing. No signs of any recent activity, except for the dismantling and shoving of random items, which they discerned was from the group that Brapri had stolen the papers from. Meanwhile, Daria decided to continue tracking these horse prints and carts, and she followed it north. Although losing the track momentarily during her search, she realized that the tracks were headed up to a hillside a couple of miles out of town. Storm and Pyru then catch up with Daria, and they make their way to this hillside, where, upon further investigation, they notice that there were 3 distinctive marks where something like a tripod had been placed with something heavy on top. It had a clear view of the town, but without any other further information they can gather, they headed back to Fedalum. Along the way, they saw Brapri coming closer to them, but in the distance, there was something of a shadow behind. Daria then yelled at Brapri to turn around and look out. The shadow, now having been discovered, turned around and headed back southeast. The group gave chase to it, and they were able to discern that it was a goblin. They took down this creature easily, and Pyru hoping to maybe gain some information. But Daria accidentally struck it, killing it, although it did call out to some neighboring creatures, perhaps. After not finding any information on the goblin, they then looked around to see if they could find this goblin's cohorts, which they did, but further in the distance, but it seemed that they did not hear this goblin. The group then decided to head and follow these goblins to see where they were headed. After all, in Draconicus, goblins are not very common, let alone near a town so close. They then see that these goblins had entered a cave. Brapri informs the group that the town was known for mining, and perhaps this was an abandoned mine. The group then enters the cave, and they see a couple of goblins in the distance around a campfire, cooking what looked like cattle. Daria threw a stone to the side of the cavern, hoping to gain the attention of one of the goblins to be able to pick them off. Although this did not work, Daria then used her ability to control water to snuff out one of the torches further in, hoping to gain advantage against the perceptions of the goblin. Although this did not work well, since the goblins were able to see in the darkness. As soon as the battle had started, it had ended just as quickly. The group decided to head further in to the cave to see what they'd be able to find. They walked this path for several minutes when they saw flickering lights just up ahead, indicating that there was another cavern. They sent Storm up ahead to sneak and see what was inside this next cavern. While Storm was making his way forward, he did not notice a tripwire that sprung and captured him with a net, forcing him into the air, and a bell jingling an alarm. With their surprise tack no longer valid, the group cut down Storm and start the battle. The group then paired up, where Daria and Pyru would head just north of their entrance towards the center, and Brapri and Storm would take the eastern enemies. It was a grueling exchange where Daria's spells just couldn't seem to hit their mark, and Pyru was up against a tough bugbear. They were successful in the end, thankfully to Storm's many direct hits, as well as Brapri's intuitive spell to be able to hold back another of the bugbears. With the battle completed, the group decides to take a short rest in this cavern and investigate what they could find inside. Although not much, they do hear something off in the distance the way they had just come. Find out next time on episode 5 to see who this might be.